Alright, it's time to talk about forms inside of handlebars, and also this kind of generally applies to forms just in HTML. So I created a new route for us, slash forms, and also a new template here, which is very basic. So just for the sake of going over what a form is, like if you imagine when you are signing up for a Google account and they're asking you like what your name is and what your password is going to be and what you want your email address to be, where you're typing, that is a form. Forms are the most basic ways that you can collect information from users on websites and then send them to your server. So needless to say, they're fundamental and we need to know how to use them. So they actually are pretty simple though. So we're just going to pass in a form, and I'm going to refresh here, and we see that nothing actually has changed yet. And the reason is because a form doesn't show up unless there are things inside of the forms. And the things that go inside of forms are called inputs. So now I'm going to put an input of type text, and now if I refresh again, we see we have a text box inside of our form. Not super stylish, but it's okay. Now I'm also going to put another input in, and this one is actually going to be a submit button. And so whatever I put inside a value is the name that's going to be on the button. So I'm going to say submit form. And so we're seeing here now that we have a button here. And when I click it, nothing really is happening except we see that there's a question mark that comes and appears in the URL. And you can tell if you look up here that the web page is actually doing something. It's submitting the form, but we're not really seeing any results. And the reason is what the submit button does is it collects all the inputs and then sends them to the server. But in order for the inputs to be collected, they need to have names. So let's make this name called user's name, just like before. So if we check now and we see what happens when I click submit, we're going to see that user's name is equal to blank. And the reason why it's blank is because we didn't type anything. So if I type in Andre here, we're going to see user's name is equal to Andre. So this is great. Now we know how forms work and how to submit values in forms. Also note, when I typed in, let's do Andre2 here, when I type in submit, in addition to updating the URL, the form actually got cleared, and that's because it reloaded the page after sending the information to the server. But let's say, for example, that maybe we want to have like some sort of default value for the form. So the way that we would do that is I can come over here to the text input that we associate with the name username, and I can put in a value here, and let's call it default for now. So you see when something is loaded, that is just showing and I have to override it. But maybe, for example, instead of always having default, I want to have whatever the query parameter is as the value that shows up in the input. So let's think about how we would do that. This is stuff that we've gone over before. And what we're going to do is I'm going to pass in username, or let's say query username. And that is actually going to be rec.query.users name, because that is what our query parameter is up here, right? User's name, rec.query.users name. And we're going to attach this to a template variable called query user name. I should make this user's name just to be consistent. Cool. So now when we go back to our form, instead of making the default value default, let's actually use our double curly brackets and plop in query user's name. And let's see what happens here. We see that currently the user's name query parameter is Andre, and that is what showed up in our form input. So if I change this to, let's say, John, we'll see that this also gets updated. So that's it. That's basically the simple explanation of forms, and we talked about how forms get submitted. You must have a name attribute on the input for the form, like the text boxes, otherwise that's not going to be sent to the server. And we see here that in its current form, the data is being sent to the server using the query parameter as such. In the next video, we'll talk about another way to submit forms.